Welcome back to Beginner's Guide to Project-Based Learning, PBL, from everydaypbl.com. This is Module 4. In Module 4, we are going to tackle the last major part of the original Project-Based Learning Plan, PLP, and that's the planning and benchmarks. So let's go ahead and take our blog all the way over there and double check that we have our, we're right here on our PLP, so scroll down. All right. So when we look at planning and benchmarks, it says up here the idiom failing to plan is planning to fail. That could be no more truer than in this category, because not having a good plan to take us from one part to the next, you're going to find that your projects stagnate. And if you've ever had a project that's kind of feels like it's been going on for weeks, it's because in your project plan, you haven't had a consistent flow of progression. So let's go ahead and look at step one. Step one is going to be the project launch. And this is what the kids are going to describe your project as. Really, you have the ability to make or break it. So when you talk about your name, they're going to be talking about, oh, I'm doing the Oedipus project, I'm doing the 1984 project, This is going to be what they call it. So make it catchy and make it short, because you want them talking about your project. All right, then moving on, in the second column here is the entry event. And this is the hook. This is what's going to get them bought into doing the projects. So how are you going to get them hooked? How are you going to get them interested? As well as giving them some information that they need to know. Are you going to give them a video? Are you going to bring in a speaker, give them a letter, blow something up? Whatever. Whatever you do to get your students intrigued to get doing this project, that's what you need to do. Bring in somebody cool to talk to and have them, Skype them in, whatever. All right. There's no one right way to do an entry event, and what you'll see, a lot of people will do combinations where they'll do the entry document or the entry letter and make it coincide with a video or coincide with the speaker. All right, but having a good entry event is going to go a long way in making sure your project gets off the ground and gets going in the right direction. So let's go ahead and look at the example that I'm doing here. We're actually going to play the game of life, because I want to show them that a board game can mimic the narrative map. Right? The game of life follows a narrative map, and so the board game will follow that narrative map. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a fishbowl where we'll have 4 or 6 or however many players we can get in the middle playing the board game, and then everyone around the outside is going to choose a color, choose a car. And they're going to record everything that happens to that car. And we'll switch out after every 2 turns so everyone gets a chance to be in the middle and gets to play. Once they're done with that, they're going to take their notes from what happened to their car, and they're going to create a narrative of that person's life. And then to coincide with that, we're also going to get a letter from Mrs. Buckley. And in reality, I'm going to write it. I'm just going to sign her name to it. She knows this. It's okay. All right. But they're going to get an entry doc letter from Mrs. Buckley saying what they're going to be creating. Through the board game and the letter, they'll have enough information and they should be intrigued to go. So, moving down to step 2. Steps 2, 3, and 4 are all going to be very similar, but slightly different. And this is the planning form. This is where we start getting into the nitty-gritty of what we're going to do. So the way you look at this is we have targeted skills, anticipated need to knows, and then the scaffolding and activities. We're going to look at each of these categories and how they differ from phase to phase. So in the early phase, you're going to need to go back to step 1, module 1, step 1, and look at what skills are listed. Look at your targeted skills from module 3. What skills are foundational? Which ones should come first in the progression? And then what prior knowledge do your students need? So which of those skills maybe they don't have them already. that you're going to have to include. Those should definitely be part of the early phase. Next, you want to anticipate what are some of the need to knows that they're going to have. What do you think they're going to want to know first? Try to avoid those logistic questions because those kind of answer themselves. Talk about content, talk about skills. Yes, think about the logistics. I'm not saying disregard them, but for this, focus on the content because you're not going to create workshops and scaffolding for logistics. You're just going to create assignments or you're going to create checkpoints for the logistics. All right. Understand in the early phase, the only information they're going to have is what they can find in the entry document or the entry event and what they have in terms of prior knowledge. So it could be all over the place. The better you anticipate, the better you're going to be in terms of scaffolding and activities. Now moving down, we got scaffolding and activities, and what's it going to take to get them to the middle phase? So what do you think they're going to need in terms of workshops, in terms of activities, in terms of, maybe some direct teaching even, to get them ready to get to that middle phase? And then you do want to have some lessons prepared. You want to have some stock workshops ready to go because if you anticipate that they need to know it, and they do need to know it, you should have something there ready for them to go. All right, moving on, we're going to talk about the benchmark. The benchmark is the gateway to get them from the early phase to the middle phase. And so how will you know when your students are ready for that middle phase? What are they going to do? What are they going to show you to say, I'm ready, let's go? So some reflection questions here. Is the benchmark an accurate gauge or predictor of student success? If you have students that are getting 100% on the benchmark here, well, they should probably get 100% on the final, right? So you need to ask yourself, is this benchmark a good indicator of student success? And then the other question here before we enter the middle phase is, have you covered all the foundational skills required for the next phase? So do they have all the foundational skills that they need to move on to the next phase? All right, so let's look at the exemplar. I'm going to go relatively quickly through this. The targeted skills here are the narrative elements, point of view, allusions, genre and theme, imagery, and then we're also going to introduce the Greek and Latin roots assignment. They're going to probably ask what are narrative elements and why are they important? What are the different types of point of view? I'm sure they actually know them, but maybe haven't heard them with the language that we use. What's an allusion? That always comes up. What is theme and how do we find it? A lot of people know what theme is, but they don't know how to find a theme. What is imagery? All right, so the lessons in scaffolding. We have a mini project that's going to do the Greek and Latin roots. It's down with OED. I have a lovely workshop that can be either big class or little class or whatever that talks about narrative elements that uses cinema, modern cinema, to teach them like the different protagonist, antagonist, all that stuff. We're going to read a chapter out of Thomas C. Foster's It's All Greek to Me, or How to Read Literature Like a Professor. The chapter is It's All Greek to Me, and it talks about Greek allusions in contemporary literature. And then we're also going to begin reading Hamilton's mythology, which is going to let me kind of model that active reading, looking for narrative elements, point of view, allusions, imagery, etc., etc., etc. So I'm really going to model this for our students. All right. The benchmark here is together as a class, we're going to diagram a story from mythology, which means I'm going to take them all the way through and I'm going to do the steps that I would expect them to do as they read. Moving on to the middle phase now, let's go ahead and flip over. The middle phase, step 3, now we want to give them an extension or a twist. What we want to do is we want to either heighten their perspective, making what they think already stronger, or we want to tweak it, change their perspective. Being able to ask them to look at their own way of thinking and either strengthen it or change it, that increases their critical thinking and problem solving skills. So it's always a good idea. So we're going to go back to the targeted skills now. Look at what you've covered in the early phase. go back to Module 1, Step 1, go back to Module 3. Which ones haven't you covered yet, and which are those emergent skills? All right, so we're not dealing with mastery yet, but which are those skills that, you know what, they should really have a good grasp of right now? And are they still accessing the skills that they got in the previous phase? All right, again, anticipated need to knows, very similar to the other ones. Again, worth noting, now all they've had is the research they've done in the early phase and the entry document. All right, moving through, you have the scaffolding. Again, it's the same thing. You're going to continue to prepare lessons, but understand you may not use them. All right, your benchmark here, how are your students going to know they are ready for the final phase? How are you going to know your students are ready for the final phase? The reflection, very similar. Have you covered all the emergent skills? Are they ready for the last phase? And then this last part's really important. Do you have a plan in place for students who are behind or need remediation? What about those that are just gangbusters, are getting it, understand it completely, and are ready for a greater challenge? So going through and looking here, the extension twist. The extension here is we're really going to focus on theme, and we're going to look at different stories and look how different themes compare. We're going to hit the expository writing extensively during this section. In fact, the benchmark here will be their expository essay. Notice that their expository essay, performance product, is not going to be done during the last phase. The last phase is going to be the game board project. So again, we have our anticipated need to knows. We're going to talk about diction. We're going to get into a little bit deeper to these skills. So it's not just kind of the easy one, it's the more challenging ones. And some of the lessons and activities, we're going to do anchor papers. We're going to continue reading mythology. I'm probably going to give up some of that modeled reading, and I'm going to let them kind of go at their own pace. And then we're going to have writers' workshops where students who struggle with writing are going to be able to come in and work on the craft of writing while we're in class. So that's going to be an individual and or small group, and or even in some cases entire class. All right, so moving on to phase 3, or the last phase, it's step 4 on our page. Here you really want to challenge their perspective, because if you challenge their perspective on what they think they know, it's either going to redefine what they know or it's going to strengthen what they know. So again, we're going back, looking at the skills. Have you covered everything? This is the last shot, so if there's anything on those skills that you haven't covered yet, you need to take a look. Again, anticipated need to knows are going to be very similar. Scaffolding. You got to get them to presentation. What's it going to take? So, and then lastly, when we talk about the benchmark, do you have a rubric? When are you going to give your rubric to them? I don't oftentimes give rubrics right at the start. A lot of times I'll wait until that kind of middle to late phase transition, and then I'll pull out the rubric, because the grade's kind of a good thing, but it's not the most important thing. The learning is the most important thing. So, and then lastly, when you look at reflection, are you going to give students the opportunity to give feedback on the project? Will they have the opportunity to provide feedback to each other in terms of their collaboration? How are you going to allow them to have feedback and them to have their voice? All right. Finally, we finish off. We have looking at our example here. I pulled back in the Greek and Latin roots. Really, this is just the entire list. I have added the technical writing here because that's the one piece that we haven't talked about before. All right, and so when you look at, we're going to have workshops, and that's how I plan on scaffolding it. Okay, so now let's go to step 5. Step 5, we have 3 questions. How does the benchmark demonstrate student progress toward the final products? You can't be 0 to 60 miles an hour on a project. You need to build to it. Do you have your project chunked out? Do you have it spaced out so it's not like we're doing nothing for 2 weeks and then the last 2 weeks of the project, oh my gosh, I'm drowning? Next, are you giving them breadcrumbs and extensions and twists that make them kind of think? Because if it's a cookie cutter system where you kind of lead them to the answer and you never swerve and you never change directions and you never give them an opportunity to have student voice, your students aren't going to have that critical thinking ability. And then the last question is, to what extent have you maximized student-centric activities? Is there a balance between teacher-driven workshops and student-driven ones? And I wrote this comment in there: this is not about students doing your favorite activity. I've seen a lot of teachers that have that one activity that they love doing, but if it doesn't fit the need to knows, it's gotta go. You can't do things just because we as teachers want our students to do them. They have to be driven by TEKS, and they have to be driven by what the students need to know in order to accomplish the project. So looking at the exemplars, I think we have a nice gradual release of responsibility where it's more teacher directed. This is the first project of the year. Teacher directed, and then kind of towards the end, students are driving it. But it's a gradual release. I think when you look at the breadcrumbs and the extensions, yes. Because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be switching again. Again, we have that switch from, oh, we're focusing on the reading, now we're focusing on the writing, and now we're kind of doing both. All right, and then last, again, this is a no yes. There's going to be lots of modeling at the start because my students are very, very new to PBL. But at the end, hopefully they will have an understanding of what project-based learning is, and they will know how they're supposed to work together. And there's going to be some teaching of that involved. So, this has been Module 4. This is the end of the true PBL document. The next document is something specific, and it's that explicit vocabulary instruction. So we'll talk about that in Module 5.